we're now transcribing as well. And if people do put things in, just be mindful of any confidentiality and concerns for others. So just give you some hints around the Q&A that we might be looking at. And it's sort of, where do policies help? Where do they get in the way? Where do they hinder? How trauma-informed approaches can change that picture, very much around language and communication and messaging, and what does this mean for staff and people who need our services? So they're just some prompts around the Q&A we're going to have later on. And this will be very much more open than previously because of the sickness that we've got in terms of people being able to chip in and maybe answer some of those questions. And I know Joe has kindly offered to support in that regard. So just open by itself. So trauma-informed framework in Sussex has been around. Was launched in July after quite a few years of thinking and collaborating together. And our vision for Sussex is a responsive Sussex community and workforce that prevents further harm, supports recovery, addresses inequalities and improves life chances by recognising and responding alongside people who are affected by trauma and adversity. There are many organised ICBs, integrated care boards. There are many organisations that are now really drawing a good trauma-informed narrative into their sort of systems and the way that we work. Quite often that's localised in training offers and that local level, how do we work with people? And our intentions really are to improve policies that we have and the way we work each other through the lens of current issues that people are going to be facing. So the roadmap that we have developed is really thinking about, from a trauma-informed lens, is really getting the conditions right, being able to get the system leaders on board to make long-term commitments. That's more of a struggle, I think, than we would hope, but we're still trying to get there with our system leaders, partners, and we really want to be able to understand experiences that people have and create learning and organisational development spaces to identify areas for improvement and gather on the ground knowledge. So what we're trying to do is achieve a kind of bottom-up approach, bit of sides in, and present that to the top of organisations for them to really think about what system improvements we need and how trauma-informed can help. Then developing those plans and recommendations, collaborate meaningfully and transformatively with change ideas to support our workforce to develop new ways of working, embedding co-production, power sharing and equitable decision making. Quite a big ask, but that's the ambition. To create spaces as well to implement and test change. So the thing is doing new things means that we need to do new things, and that can be a little bit risky and make us feel a little bit uncertain. So building a system confidence and knowledge through training and development to implement and adopt trauma-informed practice is an ongoing learning journey that we need people to kind of go on. But if we're going to make changes, we need to be able to do change, not just grow things that aren't working currently, as happens sometimes. And then the last bit, and what we're looking at today, really is about embedding trauma-informed practice into policies. And again, we've got some success with that. And then we're wanting to increase the ability for a system to look at different policies and strategies through a trauma-informed lens. In the same way we might be doing about equality and inclusion. So I'm sort of reminded of this story in system change. Some people might find this a familiar narrative, but given the day that we have, a man called Abraham Wald was an engineer working in the US military, and people who were returning from conflict in World War II, they were looking at the bullet holes where they were presenting themselves in the planes that were coming back, and so they were strengthening the wings. And actually, he was a person who noticed that actually we were only looking at the planes that made it back, and actually those were the survivability zones. So where the bullets were penetrating and people were returning, they were actually good pieces of the plane that were able to survive. And so he turned the whole metrics idea on its head in World War II and arguably saved the lives of thousands of people who were fighting in that war by just looking at things differently. They started strengthening cockpit, engine, and fuel tanks, and the survivability went up. And I sort of think sometimes our work in trauma-informed practice, systems change is roughly the same, where people are just trying to do something quite different to what the system is currently doing or has done. So sometimes the real problems go unseen. I think many people that have joined this call are going to be quite aware, hopefully, of trauma-informed practice. And I'm just going to share this little slide with you, just to give you a bit of a summary of what we might think about trauma-informed, and especially as we're thinking about the context of language and communications. So these are actually some workshop slides that we use. And I think in a nutshell, trauma-informed practice is around moving our conversation from what's wrong with you to what's happened to you. And this will work through the way that we talk with people, the way that we collaborate and how we build trust. And this is, we've done work through caseload, case studies and so on, to move the language from sort of trauma describing to a more safe use of language. And there's a quote here that I think is quite useful when we're thinking about strategies and policies and other things. Is I used to think communication was the key until I realized comprehension is. You can communicate all you want with someone, but if they don't understand you, it's silent chaos. And I think sometimes the system might actually be reflective of that quote, where people are trying to do things and actually they find themselves disabled from doing things because sometimes the policies and strategies aren't quite right. This is another slide that we might use in some of our training, and just thinking about the context of trauma-informed practice. From what we're seeing at the moment is rising problems with people coming into services who are experiencing high levels of trauma behaviours. And one of the things we might do from on the ground, so in places like libraries and our frontline staff, we might think about empathy mapping. And this is about when somebody comes into services, they might be thinking about, what are they thinking? What are they saying? What are they doing? What are they feeling? Through a trauma-informed lens, actually, when an incident occurs, we might have that capacity to reduce the impact of that, or reduce conflicts overall, if we can understand the story that lays behind somebody's arrival into services. And so that's just an example of some of the training that we would deliver to people. So unacceptable behaviour policies are a bit of a live issue. We've got increased aggression abuse that's directed at staff, and we have issues with staff wellbeing, we have issues with client wellbeing, and we have patient safety concerns and the ability to deliver the right type of care. And staff need protection, and I think one of the fulcrums that we have in the system, one of those balancing points really, is how does staff feel protected at the same time as we're delivering trauma-informed practice. And sometimes this can feel somewhat at odds if we don't have the policies in the right place. Clients need safer environments, and organisations need a culture of respect and professionalism as well. We need clear policies and also support people by reducing conflict messaging and protecting both people and the system. So sometimes we have things that might actually inadvertently increase the amount of violence and aggression we might face in our services. And post-COVID, a lot of these things have got considerably worse. And so people are experiencing more issues in more places than we have done before. So unacceptable behaviour policies are quite a live issue. So I'm going to pass over to Lynette. We're trying to do quite a big, wide range of work. Lynette is Programme Manager for NHS Sussex, and she's been working really hard over the last year on our violence prevention reduction strategy. So, Lynette, can I pass over to you to give us a headline of what the system is doing?
Sure. Thanks, Louise. Morning, everyone. So we all know how important it is that our staff feel safe and supported at work, and it is, of course, a legal requirement that we protect the health and well-being of our staff. Across Sussex, we came together last year to develop a shared violence prevention and reduction strategy, and we're now shaping an improvement plan to turn that strategy into real practical changes. So we are aiming to create workplaces where NHS staff feel safe and supported, that violent behaviour is identified and prevented early, all incidents are reported within 24 hours, that violence prevention and reduction practices are embedded in daily trust operations, that staff have improved access to training such as de-escalation and trauma-informed practice, and that's something that Louise has been working with us on. So thank you to Louise for all her hard work around that. And also we want communication and language guides that are improved and widely used. Thanks, Louise, back to you.
Thanks very much, Lynette. And it's really important that we do have this this system connection, and the way that we can all sort of share that language and those ideas and intentions, and make sure they are joined up across quite a wide and complex system.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So from Brighton and Hove, and I know I have got some Brighton and Hove people on the call, and this is the bit where I'm going to be reading things out, and I don't have the direct sort of knowledge of the working in this, because unfortunately Holly is not able to join us today. But the policy updates in Brighton and Hove have been quite interesting in how they've built a sort of new narrative when we've really unpicked a policy and sort of taken it apart, and then sort of think, actually, this in the first instance it was really, really difficult to know what to say, how to say it. And so we had quite a few really interesting conversations about, how do we sit in that middle zone of protecting staff and protecting clients that come in who are experiencing difficulties. So in terms of the context of Brighton and Hove, and say I will pause at every slide so that anybody from Brighton and Hove can chip in with anything I might have missed. But a lot of people with multiple compound need require access to more and more community spaces and have less access to other lines of support. We're seeing increases in people attending libraries, for example. This is one of our big sort of places of work, where people with multiple compound need, they're coming in, they're needing to fill out forms, they're needing to go onto the internet. They're coming out of the rain. Some people are homeless. They're coming in. So there's all sorts of things that can kind of unravel in a library, for example, as other services are closing. And staff are having to make decisions in really high, stressful and emotionally charged areas. And this is where this is continued to increase. So we've seen people with roles that have moved from what their expectation was of that job role into other roles, which means that they are also just faced with quite an increase in high stressful moments, and also a lack of training, because the training itself, and we'll come on to that in a second, hasn't really been embedded into people who are now experiencing traumatized behaviours as they come through the door. So unacceptable behaviour was seen as relatively uncommon. However, and again, post-pandemic, these things are becoming more common and quite often more compressed and difficult. Recovery work and support practice can be heavily undermined by inappropriate enforcement and enjoined policies. Now, what we mean by that is that people who are on a recovery plan with people like peer support workers, social workers, and so on, they can do an awful lot of work in building trust, and that can be undermined very, very quickly if something happens within a situation where They might be, anything from arrest to having difficult communications from local authority or anywhere else. And there's increased awareness of the need to move from reactive to restorative system responses. So when we're looking at the 10-year plan and other things that are coming in now around prevention, work closer to home, and those types of things we're looking at in the system, actually we need to move away from reaction to restorative system processes and have a much clearer understanding of how we need to work in a trauma-informed way. Chris, I noticed you had your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Thanks, Louise. Please defer me to later if this is something we're going to cover later. But I guess my question or comment is how we integrate this kind of practice for patients who are already, maybe this isn't the right phrase, but who are already on a track around forensic history and contact with the criminal justice system. So specifically, if you have a service user who is on bail or under a court order, etc., how do we both work within any conditions of those orders? Because I know a strong principle of changing futures work is don't break the law when you interact with patients, but also push back on the idea that, like you're saying, such punishments can be doing harm long term. Does that make sense as a question?
It does. If it's okay, can you put that in the Q&A box, and we can come to that when we get towards the end, because I think those are definitely the types of questions that we've had come up in the forums that we've been in, Chris, and sort of onwards. It's one of those conundrums that we can see where policies, I think, can help build a picture that supports that narrative in the right way. Hopefully that makes sense. We put the Q in the, and we can ask the experts when we get to the end of the presentation. So the kind of current state of the policies that we found when we were looking at them were very strongly worded, and I've described them as a client owned, and that is that the responsibility of the behaviour is lying within the policy, generally solely with the client. That you've come into the service and you have done this, and so on. So very sort of at the person who is experiencing difficulties. The use of zero tolerance language, and one of the things we've done in the NHS Sussex violence prevention reduction in terms of being trauma informed is actually there's quite a lot of evidence that zero tolerance messaging doesn't work. It actually has the adverse effect. So it's much better to move towards what we do tolerate, actually what we do like, kindness and compassion. We want to work together safely with each other. Those types of language changes can actually make quite a good difference. There's an acknowledgement of underlying issues that are present for sure. So in the policies there was acknowledgement of, we know that you're struggling and it's difficult, but mostly that kind of language will be at the bottom of the page rather than the top, and that was one of the things that we made a change around. Generally, and I think this is probably across the board, the three-stage communication process was initial notification that there's a problem that needs to be looked at, and then a stronger notification of behaviour that needs to be managed through agreement, and then final action, which would normally be things like banning people from services, withdrawing contact, and banning people from premises and so on. So it might not necessarily be overly solution focused. It's just you're not welcome into this place. There might not be a follow-up plan or a support plan. And I think these are the things that might be really useful to think about and explore. And our intentions going forward really is that if there is this type of behaviour, multiple disciplinary teams and so on can really have a benefit in supporting hospitals and other places in actually creating a better support plan for people and a better safety plan, which enables them to work with other agencies to help people move away from that type of behaviour. So what we did, we studied the original letters and the communications and the policies. We did notice there were some adjoining policies, so things like lone workers policies we needed to sort of pay attention to. And we restructured the letters in the first instance to put compassion foremost. We then used empathetic descriptions of what has happened. So and actually using a bit more of that human sort of what the impact has been. And those of you that are interested in sort of leadership and other things, Simon Sinek, a great author on leadership, uses the FBI method of feelings, behavior, impact. So the example above that acronym, we were using things like some languages felt hurtful, and at times this has been threatening. And so we're sort of laying out what the feelings were, what their behaviour was, and actually what the impact has been on staff. And then following it up in the letters with describing what you would like to see in terms of positive affirmation, a bit more solution focused. So we want people to feel safe and be able to work together collaboratively. And we want you to be able to seek further support. So a reach out of sort of help. And to give you an example, and Holly was going to probably talk a little bit more just about some of the details. So apologies for the lack of the description, I guess, in this instance. But I did support her with writing these. This is some of the wording that we would have, and some of those expectations, because there has to be some responsibility put into what we're doing in terms of unacceptable behaviours. So we will speak to each other in a kind and respectful manner at all times. You will do your best not to shout or raise your voice at any support. So moving away from the zero tolerance to more around, you're going to do your best and we're going to help you get there. As this can feel intimidating. So again, you're putting in what's the impact of that behaviour, and we encourage communication at a calm and reasonable level. So you're also saying what we do tolerate and what we want to see. So hopefully that's the FBI and moving away from zero tolerance example. And I think Holly probably could have done a slightly better job of illuminating that. I'm going to pause a moment because there might be other people on the call who have worked directly or indirectly on this piece of work that might want to comment. Okay, maybe not brave enough to speak out, but we will send maybe an updated sort of information. Mickey, got your hand up.
Hi,
Welcome.
brave enough to speak out. I was just wondering, given what you said before about asking what has happened to people, and that might have happened in the stage before whenever the incident was happening, but probably unlikely because it would have been too charged. I was just wondering if the first bullet point might be, we will try to understand what happened or why this incident arose, to something there to put in a kind of, we'll do our best to understand what happened or why this ended up happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've just literally taken a caveat out of 3 letters, and I think that's possibly in those, but I think that is definitely a good shout as something that we need to see in the letters that we're writing and in the policies that we're creating as well. Thanks, Mickey. So Marianne, you had your hand up and then down.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I was a little bit unsure about you will do your best. It felt a bit like telling somebody what they'll do and having language which is a bit more, we will do our best. And otherwise it could feel a bit kind of, I don't know, either patronising or telling somebody what to do in a moment of stress.
Yeah, thanks, Marianne. And somebody else had their hand up. I can't see all of you, so I'll have to shout out if there's anything else to add.
Hiya, it's Matt Halford. I just wondered, security manager from Royal Sussex County Hospital. I'm wondering if it's of value to segregate between violent behaviours and other VNA behaviours, because tolerance of physical aggression, I believe, should be at 0. Staff don't come to work to be physically assaulted by people, and I think we need a clear definition between tolerance for behaviours.
Yeah, it's good point, Matthew. I think with the messaging around, we absolutely need to support staff, and and violence is unacceptable. It's the form of the messaging where if you put messaging in the client spaces, it tends to make things worse. So that there's definitely some of those internal messaging for staff, and actually the responses in the policies and strategies would want to highlight that. And I think again that's something that we can explore when we come to the conversation. That will be really helpful. And Rachel, you had your hand up, I think. Rachel, I don't think we can hear you. Okay, move us on. Yeah, I mean, I think those are all of those things that we want to explore, and unfortunately, Holly and Nabs are not able to join us this morning, so there are bits missing in the availability of that knowledge, and they have promised that apologise first of all, but they will update us with some more information when they're better. So in terms of what we're doing with these policies, we're sort of piloting some tools within the Changing Futures teams, and then we're amending what we need to be doing, and then we're in this process at the moment of amending the products with other social care teams, and then we're going to share across Brighton Hove Council as a resource to use alongside the policies. I'm not sure Jess was able to join us either. Joe, is there anything? I've come to the end of the Brighton Hove piece. Was there anything that you wanted to include in what I've spoken about so far?
Thanks, Louise. I think we're just sort of emphasising the sort of challenge and nuance behind it. So in my role as a frontline worker, sort of frequently experiencing challenging behaviour with the people I work with, and it often feels like trying to balance, so often the change comes within the form of sort of trusting. So my phone's going off. Trusting relationship. And so it can feel like a balance between trying to be there with the client and offer empathy and congruence and things to help form that relationship. But at times,
they can really speak now. So yeah, if we go into emails,
can everybody put themselves on mute who aren't speaking, please? We've got some crossover. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry, carry on, Joe.
Yeah, so it can feel like, how much am I willing to sit through in terms of verbal abuse? It certainly feels clear that physical incidents are unacceptable, and I think I'd probably agree that would be a zero tolerance approach. However, if it's just gonna have to shut down the conversation or walk away from an interaction every time it gets challenging, that doesn't feel helpful or sort of conducive to change. So often in those intense sort of emotional situations, it can really feel sort of in the moment judging what the level of risk is, what's helpful to the client, what I'm able to sit through and be supportive of. And I think that can change from interaction to interaction. So really sort of, from my perspective, recognizing the difficulty of doing that in a way that's sort of supportive, but also safe for people. So I think it's a really interesting conversation that I imagine, it needs to keep being had.
Yeah, I think it's thanks, Joe. Yeah, I think it's a fairly sort of non-ending conversation of, getting that balance right. I think it's really, really difficult, and I think that's the hopefully the conversation we can have in the last sort of half hour, 40 minutes or so, where we can explore some of those problems. Joe.
Yeah, I'd say I also work in the same team as other Joe, and similar reflections around the nuance of things. I think something I experience in my sort of direct role with clients is a difference in response based on the client's own trauma response. So if a client has a flight response, when responding to a challenging situation, we get really worried and we'll kind of often be trying to find that person, making loads of effort to try and engage with them. And the response is often different when it's a fight trauma response that someone might have to a challenging situation. And there can be like a tendency to pull away support, for example. So yeah, it's probably like a question or discussion point for the end around how do we balance the priority of sort of staff well-being and safety alongside not sort of punishing people for the way that they respond to trauma and adversity they've experienced in life, but also recognizing that that psychological safety that's so important to trauma-informed practice goes both ways, and staff need to feel sort of psychologically safe in order to maintain that trusting relationship that Joe was speaking about just before. It has to be from both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is definitely that pivot point of the knowledge and understanding of where people have come from, plus the what is tolerable within our organisations and with our staff, and recognising those difficulties. None of this is easy work, and I think that this is why this is such an interesting point of conversation, and with the expertise that we've got in the room, I think the conversation is going to be quite rich. Thanks very much, Joe. Some of the kind of themes that come up around what helps is, as much as possible, predictability and clarity. If people are in predictable spaces and there is enough clarity around, you are going to be de-escalating by design. And some of these can be quite simple things, because actually people who do have struggle with behaviours and so on might actually get triggered by something else that's going on, someone else who's frustrated, and some of those could be quite simple things, like not being able to find the lavatory, not being able to find the parking machine in some places, and signposting being hidden, and not kind of clear. So there's some really good work in university hospitals in Worthing around some of their signage being very, very clear and distinct, and you can see from a long way away where you're supposed to be, and then other examples elsewhere where the signage is not particularly clear, and if people are having traumatic problems, they're likely to be quite tunnel visioned, not be able to see or comprehend things, but becomes more sort of difficult. So some of those other things can really help underpin the reductions in unacceptable behaviours, which is really the piece that we need to be thinking about. Consistent routines or handovers that reduce confusion or perceived threat. So again, come back to the language and the way that we describe people and the way that we describe situations. If we're using quite blaming language to people, and then you're doing that in a handover, then somebody who's going to be receiving that person might be have some subconscious or conscious trepidation about meeting that person, which then might be picked up in unconscious or conscious biases, that then could also escalate situation. And being culturally aware, it's two words. It's a massive topic at the moment. There's an awful lot of racialized traumatization that's happening at the minute, and we are doing some work with NHS Sussex and others on some of the responses around the increases in and prevalence of issues for people from the global majority and others who may have an increased problem when they're coming to the front doors. Being aware of the unjust application of power. Sometimes people can use power in difficult ways, and that's something to be cognizant about. Usually that's around culture. So constant ethical reflection, and I think I've recently done a bit of a deep dive with our multiple disciplinary teams around what the patterns that are emerging with them. And actually one of the things that's really come up is they're very strongly able to be reflective and have that ethical consideration at all times. They have reflective practice. They're doing things through that trauma-informed lens. That's really quite palpable with our people. But that they've had the fortune, I think, of some of the time and some of the structures that have been put in place through the Changing Futures programme to accomplish that. So the question would be, we need to create space for people to have ethical and reflective places. Co-production and collaboration is always a place on the agenda. Around the more you're able to give somebody a sense of control and a sense of choice, and collaborate with you in as much as possible, that can have a good de-escalation effect. And those types of things need to be written into the policies. These are the things that you want to kind of see people doing, trying to do. So when we're writing policies, are we sort of paying attention to these headlines that we've got on here? Resisting unconscious bias and dehumanizing groupthink. So it can be very easy for people to start describing things when they do unravel in a difficult way, where we end up dehumanizing, those people and othering people, and sort of creating a situation of humanistic distancing that can also create problems. So in policies, making this more of a statement that people can see and think about should help us towards building psychologically safe, connected teams, and the ability to speak against practice. And again, something that we've seen within our MDTs is the ability to talk against the wrong type of practice and negotiate and advocate for people to have improved experiences in services. So I'm really sorry that you're just listening to me. But some of the adjoining policies to think about as well are, these are some that I've picked out from West Sussex that were adjoining, that also need consideration of being revamped in a trauma-informed way and focusing on the way that we're supporting people to reduce the likelihood of escalating behaviours. So risk management policies, lone worker policies, security management, health and safety, policy incident reporting. And again, as Lynette was describing earlier, trying to work on that to an extent, but actually, how are we able to report incidents? Can we report them safely? And are they giving us a space to talk about emotional problems that people might have, or emotional abuse that people might do? So when we've looked at some of the policies, they haven't necessarily given space for people to be reporting incidents around emotional abuse, as well as the physical. So that those have been looked at in Brighton Hove. I know that through Tim Wilson, Eleanor. I think Eleanor's on the call. Restrictive practice policies, so a bit more focused on those mental health services, perhaps, and the deprivation of liberty policies and so on. How are they sort of interacting with the unacceptable behaviour? And domestic violence abuse policy that I picked out from West Sussex County Council. Also needs to come along training, trauma-informed skills and trauma-informed safer spaces training, conflict resolution, de-escalation training. A thing that we've noticed also is that actually some of this is not available to people. So we might have intentions of our workforce needs to be trauma-informed. We need to have people that are more trained in conflict resolution and de-escalation, but actually in a lot of spaces, though, that training is not available. The resource isn't there. So another thing about creating better policies for behaviour, risk and planning, the training also needs to be in place as well. And also reflective practice. I haven't written that, but debriefs, reflective practice, trauma-informed supervision, creating learning cycles. So those people that know about quality improvement or continuous improvement, it's around learning from what we're doing and sort of improving in a continuous way. So I'm going to move on to Ab's slides and say, unfortunately, he can't be with us either because he's not well. But some of the work from West Sussex, some of this is going to be sort of repeated elsewhere, but there are certain legislation, policies and statutory duties that we need to pay attention to when we're writing these types of policies. We generally plan our days and focus on completing tasks. I'm not sure what that bit is. Yeah, I mean, just sort of noticing the compassion fatigue because, say, Abs sort of last minute wasn't able to join us. But I think that compassion fatigue, unconscious bias, it really does need to be sort of thought about in quite a profound way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop there, I think, and jump over to the Q&A session. He's going to jump past some of the slides that Abs had. Or just maybe to end on this particular one, which was in there, is just around the key principles of trauma-informed practice is safety. You know, sort of looking through everything through the lens of making sure that people feel physically and emotionally safe, trust, being honest, consistent, reliable, choice, giving people control over decisions that affect them, collaboration, you know, working together, not top down, that sharing that power in the right way, focusing on strengths and confidence building. I think the more people feel confident, maybe the less likely they might be to have more likely to have their needs met, and cultural awareness, respecting people's backgrounds and identities. So it's over to you. I'm going to stop sharing, come back in the room. It's always a bit difficult because I can't see people's faces while you're talking. And I'm going to go into the and have a look at the Q&A. And do keep the comments coming in and the questions coming in. Does anybody have any comments while I'm just having a little look through the questions? What do people think? Joe. Yeah.
Hi, thanks, Louise. I seem to be invisible.
Mm.
Maybe that's for the best. Oh, I'm here. Yeah, I did put a question in the Q&A, but I'm really interested, and maybe Lynette can come in on this as well. This feels like instinctively the right thing to do, the right way to proceed to bring a trauma-informed lens to dealing with challenging behaviour and de-escalating trauma responses. But I just wondered, do we have any evidence that this approach has reduced incidents, or has that it's working? I guess that's what my question is around.
Yeah, good question. I think with the zero tolerance messaging, that there is evidence that that having zero tolerance either makes no difference or makes things worse, depending on how that is delivered. The statistics, I think Lynette might have a little bit more of the overview of the statistics of the reductions. That there will be some evidence that will have that working in a trauma-informed way does have an impact on it. What we do have is the problem at the moment of the increased social issues that are rising out of the post-COVID landscape. That means certain things are going up when actually the improvements are having a difference. And I think this is where the localized quality improvement small testing is really useful, because then you can localize a change. I don't know whether Marianne, I don't know if you've got anything from Sussex Community Trust that will give us any insight into the into any reductions that you're seeing with the work you're doing. Who's still on the call?
I think Marianne's had to leave.
Oh, have you got anything, Jane? Because I know, are you close to this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really hard thing to measure. At the moment, we're kind of looking at how do we measure the particularly the longer term impacts. So I think it's very much, we know that the trauma-informed care training is really well received. We know from our staff survey that actually certain things like burnout have started to reduce, but actually trying to attribute, what is because of reflective practice or what is because of trauma-informed care training has proved to be rather challenging, but it's very much on our radar at the moment to try and work through that. Don't know if Lucy's got any. I think Lucy's on the call as well today. I don't know if you've got anything you want to add, Lucy.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. I think you're right, and I think our conversations are around, because a lot of this is kind of prevention work as well. It's difficult to know what would have happened or not happened if that training or reflective practice hadn't been in place. So I think it is, it's conversations we're having at the minute as SCFT is how we can kind of measure it in a meaningful way that kind of captures all of that.
Yeah, I think it's very much that onward conversation about. I think you can do localized sort of change, measure it, and then you can see some improvements. I'm just seeing if I can find anything while we're talking. Matthew, over to you.
Yeah, it's just around the trauma-informed training. I'm just wondering if there are aspects of assault avoidance linked with that training, because obviously the problems are with that staff are reporting these issues because they've been physically assaulted, and what we're having as a problem within our trust and what we've been trying to do is get as many high reporting locations of violence and aggression behaviour on our training, but the take up isn't great because it's not a mandated training. Now we've been trying to push that out, and I think that yes, de-escalation is it is very good, and our security provision do that, but I think nationally we need to have something like that mandated to support staff to avoid the assault and to carry on the de-escalation, just as an input.
Yeah. And I think the other problem that happens is that if you do a multitude of things, so if you're doing trauma-informed practice, building up de-escalation training and other things, you're doing quite a few things all at once. Then it can be really difficult to isolate what's making that change. I mean, I certainly think that the evidence that NHS Education for Scotland have had on the impact of trauma is that there has been notable reductions with people, but they're a bit more on that kind of qualitative basis. I'm just having a look through while we're still talking. Laura.
Hi. Yeah, this was like really interesting. It's nice to see that this kind of trauma-informed practice is getting like infiltrated through different services. I work for the street outreach team in Brighton, and I think we have quite a good trauma-informed practice about working with clients. I think our side is more about like staff welfare, and kind of like our tolerance to it is probably maybe too high. We need to have more things in place to be supporting the team. So that's kind of like why I'm here, trying to think about how we can have staff, how we can support staff working with these clients. I think like some of my questions was going to be what happens. So we've got, you said there's those 3 stages, I didn't call them warnings, but there were 3-stage communications. What happens after that final stage to these clients? Because I think like obviously a lot of people with multiple compound needs, it's extremely complex. They do need access to services. If there's this 3-stage policy, then what's the next stage? Like these people still, exist in our community, still need access to the services, then we'll probably be more marginalized away from the services. So yeah, like what happens after the 3-stage communication? I think from like our side, we work with rough sleepers. So anyone who's rough sleeping, we never close the case. If you're rough sleeping, you're open to us. How we might communicate and engage with clients would probably adjust. And then another question was kind of going to be, as like a manager, I take on a lot of the cases from workers. If there's like a client that's maybe extremely challenging or people are finding difficult to work with, then me as a managerial team will take them on, and then in the end, then we end up with all the the most complex clients, so kind of just like a discussion around that as well, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are the knotty issues. I think with what we currently have in terms of unacceptable policies is we just ban people from things, and then if there's no ongoing, and I think especially thinking about the hospitals, is the links between the work that you might be doing, Laura, and the work that Matthew might be doing, or Chris at Denham, on the call, maybe come back in, Chris, if that's helpful, because I think what the knotty issue is that people still need support, and they can get the right type of care in the right way in the community. That needs to be articulated in the unacceptable behaviour policy as that next step, because I think what there is there's an empathetic, gentle nudge. This is not okay to be like this. We need to work together to come to a solution around the behaviours. Then there's a second stronger warning, and then the third one is going to be, actually we can't manage this in this environment. So what is the right environment for that person to be in, or who needs to be helping, and maybe how can we as hospitals or service providers pull in that help from the right place and ensure that's resourced properly, with good, sort of system working. I don't know does that make sense? What are your thoughts, Matthew or Chris, on that question that Laura's posing?
Laura, could you, sorry if I've struggled to follow the exact question, but tell me again. I guess, see if I can answer from a secondary care point of view.
I suppose the general question was, when the 3 communication letters have been sent, what's the next support for the client, because they're still in our community, they're still around. And I suppose with A&E as well, they'll still attend A&E and be there. So the hospital staff there are still working with these clients. We're still working with the clients because they're on the streets. Like, what's the next step when other services pull out?
Yeah, I don't know the answer, and I agree that it's a problem. And I suppose to draw a bit on anecdote without obviously identifying any individuals, the question I posed earlier was motivated by a similar problem of, well, for example, if an individual is, as the terminology says, red carded from a hospital site, then what is the intent of that action? Because I think my gestalt answer to that is that if an individual has been so violent and aggressive, and demonstrated such unacceptable behaviour that they've been red carded from a site, it seems unlikely to me that they've demonstrated completely different behaviour at every other hospital site. Although I agree it's possible it might be related to individual circumstances. So are we saying that this individual then cannot attend emergency services at any site? My interactions with ambulance services, when we've made those decisions in hospital, has on the whole been that the ambulance service is not willing to agree to that red card and take the patient to another site. And as we've kind of gone over several times here, what's the point in that policy if it means that no one's going to take any notice of it? We're wasting our time and we're possibly doing harm. So I agree that that's difficult. And I guess my instinct is to wonder, are we accessing data in the right way as a whole health system? So, most of my work personally is in Brighton and Hove as opposed to West or East Sussex, although a little bit of is the case there. So are we coming together as a city in Brighton and Hove well enough to understand what happens when we when we exclude somebody from a service to their healthcare? Is it equitable? Probably not. And is it doing more harm than good? Probably. But I think we need system conversations, as in a forum where council services, primary and secondary care services, policing services, library services, etc., all the other stakeholders that I haven't mentioned, can discuss these issues and have a system response. That probably doesn't answer the question specifically, but I agree that it is a problem, and I worry about what happens to those kind of patients.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I mean, I think the forums that's the way we need to go in terms of understanding the problems that we do have. We could passing them over and just saying, well, you can't come here, you go somewhere else, doesn't necessarily fix the problem. And then we end up with the revolving door, problem of people sort of, being in one place, then another, and actually the actual root cause, the root problem not being addressed, or if there's work already happening with people, it is the at pace, I suppose, people working in your environment not being able to access the intelligence that other people might be able to bring to that particular case in what does work, what doesn't work for that person, to pull that person away from that unacceptable behaviour. And I'm thinking that Joe possibly might have a response, but I'll just do this in order so you can hold that thought. So Natasja.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Really interesting to hear about the kind of secondary care situation. My question was about primary care, but also about the kind of what happens after the 3-stage policy. So we're doing a project looking at special allocation scheme services for sort of a secure setting for patients who have been removed from their GP practice for violence or aggression. And an early finding that we're seeing there is that there are sort of mixed opinions about whether the purpose of that scheme is sort of for rehabilitation or sort of punishment to kind of teach patients a lesson. So I think there is a sense in which that there is some people think that in itself is a kind of violence response or even prevention strategy. So I just kind of wondered whether there are key sort of policies or guidance that people could point us to, or just opinions that people have about how this kind of confusion could be responded to with the sort of trauma-informed principles, or just what people think, or if it resonates with the secondary care or other sectors, even that kind of debate about sort of if you can kind of teach patients a lesson, which doesn't seem super aligned, but yeah.
I think I did. I think I did hear that sort of articulated in a forum a little while ago, of actually we need to sort of do things that do feel like they're from a punitive standpoint rather than the kind of caring standpoint. Please keep the comments coming into the chat box. We can pick all these up afterwards as well. Christine, welcome.
Hello, yes, I'm working up in Gateshead, and we've had some real challenging behaviour recently with some of our communities. I work for the VCSE, and I wonder whether improving the links, you're talking about those three stages, improving the links with the VCSE, with your local community centres and things, is some way of being able to keep an eye on those people and make sure that they're looked after. So, for example, the worry lists that we keep within our 4 different postcodes, we keep a worry list, we keep an eye out, we have regular check-ins with NHS, GPs, doctors, and we really keep those worry lists up to date. And if you like, it's relational safeguarding, because we're looking at how do we creatively welcome those people in who may not feel safe in a space, for example, a hospital which is busy and it's noisy, and there are not a lot of times where you can just sit down and be at peace, or just have 5 minutes to go outside into the garden. I wonder if your colleagues in VCSE land are already doing this and are already creating those spaces. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, when you're talking about evidencing, we've just embarked on creating a ripple effect map for the 5 years of devolved decision making that we've been working on here in Teams and Dunstan. And in doing a ripple effect map, we have essentially looked at those worry lists, how they have improved the lives of the local people. So we've got people going back into work. We've got people who can now volunteer or run a group on their own. We've got people who are lollipop ladies who are able to kind of get into stuff that they wouldn't originally be able to, that doesn't show up on your NHS statistics, it doesn't show up on when somebody comes out of the probation service. But when I was listening to a couple of people from various funders and from government funding, they both said, if we ignore the ripple effect of the decisions that are being made, we do so at our peril. And that is vital, that we're taking these on, and we're taking the stories as well as the specific data and the numbers.
Yeah, thanks so much, Christine. Yeah, I like that. The worry, being concerned for people, and I think people do see things that there is some predictability for how people are in the community, and are seen by regular people who can diffuse or just have that on the ground knowledge that then isn't transferred into the system, which becomes more and more mechanistic the more people come into a system. And when it's in really high stress, place like A&E, it's very difficult to control. Whereas actually you've got more opportunities to control with that knowledge and understanding of people working in the community. And some people have been working for years with people who will know what will work and what won't work. And so I agree that actually having much stronger links with that localized knowledge that you would possess in that place, getting that closer to A&E function is actually part of the system dream, I think. Joe.
Oh, Christine, I think your mic's still unmuted.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking from a standpoint of, I don't know if there's sort of colleagues on the call from like police teams or like community safety teams, but thinking about those situations where we feel like we've sort of exhausted the options that are available to us in terms of managing challenging behavior within like a support service environment. And another one of those kind of key like principles around trauma-informed care is like clarity around roles and responsibilities. And my responsibility in someone's care and support is not to take like enforcement action. I don't have those sort of levers necessarily like available to me in my role like as a support worker. But what would the role, for example, look like of community safety teams or even sort of specialisms within the police being more present within MDT discussions around specific clients and cases where clients are experiencing, or staff, for example, might be experiencing sort of criminal offences taking place against them, but they're not the relevant people to take sort of action on that. Whether there would be a sort of a role for those services to be more involved in the sort of way that the MDT discussions are held.
Yeah, I think you're right, Joe, and I think that was something that Abs was going to talk about if he wasn't unwell today, about exactly that. I think the community safety teams, I think the criminal justice system in of itself around the way that it communicates with health and social care needs to be improved as well. I'm going to move over to Bill.
So we've been doing some work in East Sussex around this across the whole of the local authority. And I think from our perspective, what we've learned is that, yes, you probably will already have policies in place that have some helpful parameters set out, but actually it's quite hard to have a blunt instrument that can be applied across complex situations, people's needs, settings, etc. So it's more about what guidance and communications are you putting out there to help staff to navigate through those complex situations. Who can they draw on, whether it's their manager or someone else, to help them navigate through that situation, to sort of take the right action to address the behaviour with the person who's perpetrating it, or indeed get the support that the staff needs. And across all of that is the key messaging and principles that come out from your kind of leaders around what are they expecting in terms of talking about these issues, getting that support. And it's actually that stuff that's more important than the kind of letter of the policy that you have written down as an organisation. That's our kind of reflection on it.
Thanks, Bill. Laura.
Just to like follow on from what Joe was saying, me and Joe used to work quite closely together, and I think we had some very challenging clients, probably some of the most challenging clients in the city, and I think we were developing this idea of how do we then get the, maybe not police, but a community support, like the more enforcement side, to support with these clients, because like Joe said, we was reaching a limit of like what we feasibly could do and were able to like personally take as well, and it wasn't benefiting the clients. We're getting like very stuck with certain clients and not moving forwards and not like progressing in any kind of meaningful way. I think like it'd be good for like police and services like this to have this type of training, because I think sometimes we're reluctant to involve any kind of enforcement, because that's kind of the opposite of how we work. We want to work with not that police don't work with compassion, but do you mean like, that's the opposite. Enforcement is the opposite of what, you know, trauma informed and how we would like to work with clients. But sometimes I do think it is necessary. So how to like have these kind of enforcement services working in a more trauma informed way with these clients who are like extremely traumatized, who have multiple complex needs and all of that, and how that kind of sits alongside a supported staff like support us. Like it's like it's very juxtaposition of these two services working together. But I do think for certain clients it is needed, like staff aren't like support staff aren't able to or willing to, like, you know, work with certain clients who are extremely like verbally aggressive on a regular daily basis to workers. So yeah, it would be good if kind of enforcement services were having this type of training and this kind of trauma informed, how they could then be doing their enforcement side with these clients, but in a trauma informed and supportive way as well.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Yeah, I know that Christine Langhoff and others have done quite a lot of work with the police in terms of trauma informed practice, but it's always under this tension of that immediacy, the reactive response to a more sort of measured, or, you know, who to go to, who's this person, do we know them? I know the police are looking at a few multiple contacts with the hospitals and what, you know, how to manage that. But it would be better if they could have a wider conversation which included the people who are, you know, caring and supporting those people outside of that situation, that the police would need to have the public safety at the core of its function at that moment. But as much as possible, it's like how do you keep the relational work ongoing and trusted, whilst, you know, other things may have to happen along that process if that person ends up in the wrong place at the wrong time, kind of thing. I've got is it Lee Jones with your hand up?
Yeah, hi Louise.
Thanks.
Yeah, just yeah, fantastic work. Yeah, what I'm seeing, what I've just kind of listened to, what's going on in Sussex, it's just, yeah, it seems to me very progressive and something that really resonates with myself. I just as people are talking, it just always manages it. My approach to certain things is that we manage polarities. So like you mentioned, the kind of zero tolerance, you know, so that's one polarity. And you put in zero tolerance approaches, but you just create another problem. I.e., you say kind of people, it's not creating a solution, it's creating a more problem. And then on the other side, we're not here to be punch bags, you know, and come to work and be too liberal and too kind of offhands, and then that creates another problem. It's kind of, there's this middle way, isn't there, that we're always managing. With each individual client, some people will trigger some people don't trigger other people. It's a complex field, I think, and it's, to me, it always comes back to people being aware of themselves and what kind of will bother them, you know, and if they get scared by certain people or, you know, aggressive behavior. I always found, because I was trained as a family therapist in the past, and there's lots of good evidence of approaches around parenting teenagers, and so it was kind of reminded me of that, of like non-violent communication and also dialectical behavioral therapy. So they're two approaches I think that are really valuable for people to get trained in when they're working in this field.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think the sort of the learning about behavior and learning about yourself and the interaction with others, sort of going back to the empathy slide that I had further towards the beginning of being able to understand that our interactions are, you know, what I think, what you think, my behavior and your behavior, and your assumptions and beliefs and my assumptions, that they're all interacting in that moment. And you know, as much as possible, the learning and understanding around how to reduce that, you know, like the flash moments, is really where we need to do this. And I think when I looked at the training that's available, things like de-escalation, conflict resolution, and all of those things, actually they're quite restricted in the way that they're delivered. And then I think, as someone else said, well, they're not mandatory. I think it was Matthew or Chris, you know, that they're not mandatory. So actually the take up's quite low. And what we've found with trauma-informed practice is that you get the community of the willing turn up in the first instance. You get, you know, you train 200 really willing people. They're really into it. They're really invested in it. How do you get the harder to reach people in that context? And that's that trauma-informed statement right there. That how do we get to the people in the services who really do need to pay attention to this type of thing, because they won't have the type of awareness perhaps that other people that have already been down that journey have got in what's my role in this if something starts unraveling. You know, and if I've got an access, I think with the unacceptable policy, to just push it away and make it someone else's problem in other parts of the system, but it's nothing to do with me, you can't come in here anymore, is that you're then going to inflate the problem, and you're going to continue having a revolving door of a few people that are those high risk people that need you know, that specialist attention. And I think that's where you think that things like the multidisciplinary teams, the work that Changing Futures does in being able to really explore some of those opportunities is something not to be missed. I think Laura is next. My screen's gone a little bit funny. I've got some feeling I've got people trying to get into my computer, but never mind. Yeah, Laura.
Thank you. Probably reiterating a little bit of what's been said, what was occurring to me was what sometimes I was thinking of is when you hear of clients with MCN that behave very differently in different settings, and sometimes you think they're talking about somebody, you think, I can't believe that I've dealt with that person and they didn't behave like that at all. Maybe there's some learning there from other services. What was it about that setting that caused that behaviour? That won't all be about the service, it might be about other clients that are present or whatever, but there's potentially some learning there, isn't there? And also just any kind of blanket policies that don't treat the person as an individual, I think, a bit problematic. And that relies on staff having time to get to know you. And not all services here we're talking about can do that, can they? But if you know the individual and you can treat them as an individual, and sometimes I've been challenged on policies that people see as not fair because they maybe aren't consistently, if you do this, that's the response. But then I've always used the example of if I went to court for an offence, so does someone else in the room, then we might get a different sentence because we've got different background, different experiences, and that's okay, isn't it? That's fair then to treat the person as an individual. They were just things that were coming into my mind, really.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I think I've got Neil next, Neil Denton.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Louise, and all. Excellent session. Just a little bit of input that might be helpful. People were talking about research and about the impact of this kind of stuff. It's really thin on the ground. There was a study in 2009 from Korea that looked at the impact of non-violent communication as an approach, so it was a needs-first approach. And empathy building, and they did that in a hospital and found a reduction of 30% of violent incidents. And then the evidence gets really mushy, because there's quite a lot of strong evidence that says these kind of needs approaches, which I would include trauma-informed as part of that, increase empathy, and then some research that says increased empathy reduces violence, but it starts to get a bit mushy as a researching term. But I think the things for me really important, I think it might have been Joe that talked about the different manifestations of fight versus flight in trauma-informed, and really needing to give professionals, I think, some insights into very different looking manifestations of behaviour through very similar causes in terms of what's happened to people. And that makes me think of the work that Harvard did a few years ago on the impact of early years trauma on neurological development. So the connections between the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the neocortex. So we were starting to see people that had experienced early years trauma as can't do, as opposed to won't do. But really understanding there, they would describe it as manifesting as hot or cold, which is that fairly similar fight, flight, freeze kind of stuff. So I thought that might be useful. And then in terms of that links with community safety, I used to be a community safety specialist many moons ago. And we tried to shift the thinking across the teams. So police officers would always tell us that they're the front line. And we would try and encourage that thinking that says actually they're the back line, and really expand our thinking about what the team was. And I think that goes back to Christine's point that says actually we can do systems analysis from within our sphere, but if we look further out and we look from a service user or a human being's perspective, quite a lot of those contacts with the community. So if we can start to expand what that team is, then we start to really shift that dial. The big caveat to that, that depends on good relationships within staff teams, between staff teams, and between organisations. And it requires our staff to be working in an environment that puts relationships first and doesn't work in command and control kind of mechanisms of hierarchy and power over, because that creates moral injury, and therefore we're just traumatizing our staff, which means that they have very little chance of responding to these things apart from an increased aggressive and confrontational kind of way that leads to dehumanization. So just some brief thoughts from me, but excellent session. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I really like that back, front line, the back line. Yeah, because I think by the time the police arrive, things have already been tried by numerous people. That's a really useful way of looking at it. And I do think the only way that we're going to really work towards getting improved unacceptable behaviour policies, and the way that we do this is through the training and understanding, that the safer spaces training that we're delivering currently into these spaces, to raise the awareness with leadership and managers about how to look after staff, but also learning about what are the staff experiencing, what's the reality of that, because if we're not talking truth to power, we're not going to get any way forward with this. But also the system coming together to think about the empathy across system boundaries as well, because we're also in a position where the NHS can do a piece of work, local authorities can do a piece of work, voluntary sector does a piece of work, and actually there's little empathy between all of those three, or criminal justice as well, throw that one into that mix. Actually, if we were all able to come together to think about what are the best solutions, how can we help and support each other, how can we become more connected, then we'll start solving these different problems.
Just to quickly come back on that, there's a Professor Jodie Hoff-Gittell from Brandeis in the States, runs something called relational coordination, and huge amounts of evidence that says it's node-to-node relations, good relations within organisations and across organisations that increase safety in the system. And if it's not there, you may as well kind of give up.
Absolutely, and I think that the move towards sort of noded transactional relational ways of working, rather than the current sort of hierarchical strong connections between a variety of things that don't actually understand each other, that's where we need to move in terms of understanding our system with each other. Sorry, I've just got some things coming up now. I think I'm being pinged by the Russians. I'm not sure, but I've got some things that are flashing up on my screen that are a bit uncomfortable. Any other sort of thoughts and questions? I think this has been super useful. Getting the insight from yourselves. Hopefully this has triggered that conversation. We're also in that same process. We've got some commonality with our national colleagues that are on the call, and our localised people, so Matthew and Chris and the Joes and other people from Sussex Community Trust that have inputted into this. And I think this is a common conundrum, and I think it's going to become better over time by increasing the times that we can come together and think about these things. Any final questions before we come to a close? I'm just going to have a little look through the questions, see if there's anything that I missed. Lee.
Yeah, it wasn't really a question, just an observation, really. We've got a sensory department I work for the voluntary sector in Plymouth, so we have Changing Futures here. And we have a sensory department, and I'm very conscious that those with hearing impairments and sight impairments sometimes get missed from these conversations. The way that they display sometimes can be seen as negative behaviours, but actually it's just communication. You know, so I'm really conscious that we need to consider those things. That was just an observation, really. Yeah, good observation as well, Lee. Thanks for bringing that in. Yeah, I've actually lost the questions. Yeah, what I'll do, we got that transcribed, is that we will get some notes out for you. What I think might be a good idea is to actually have a follow-up session, maybe a slightly shorter session for people that want to continue. What I would encourage people to do, I guess, is have these conversations in your local areas and reach out to people. There are people on this call in Sussex in particular that I think would really benefit from being invited into different conversations. But I think that's it for now. I'm just going to double check the chat box, see what else is there. Just some sort of what have we got? People saying thank you and leaving. Okay, cool. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Apologies for the people that were not here and able to contribute. Wishing them speedy recoveries. Thank you very much for your attention, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Louise.
Thanks, Louise. Take care. Thanks, Louise. Excellent stuff.
I'll ring you. I'll ring you.
Thanks. Yeah, so my computer just went really ridiculous